It might seem fairly intuitive that when you have two trading partners or potential trading partners and they have different strengths, one is better in one production possibility and the other is better in the other, it might make sense that those two should cooperate by specializing in what they're best at and then trading with each other. But now we're going to push the concept of specialization and trade a little bit further and ask what would happen if one of the two trading partners was dominant in both of the productive possibilities. In this case, we're going to take Alice and we're going to crank up her ability to catch fish and her ability to weave blankets. Now, Bob, we're leaving him the same as before. He can catch one fish every 3 hours, or a third of a fish per hour, and he can weave one blanket per hour. But Alice, instead of having the opposite abilities as Bob, we're going to make her better at both things. So if she fishes, she's going to catch, on average, 1.25 fish per hour. If she weaves blankets, she's going to weave 1.25 blankets per hour. Both of them still have 12 hours. So now let's think about what this would look like if we graphed it out. Bob is going to have the same productive possibility frontier as he did before. So if he spends all of his time catching fish, he can catch 4 of them and he's not going to weave any blankets. If he spends all his time weaving blankets, then he would weave 12 of them and he would not have any fish. And now if we connect those 2 points to each other, we have his productive possibility frontier, PPFB. All right, what about Alice? Well, if she spends all of her time fishing, 12 hours times 1.25 is 15 fish. And of course, she would have no blankets. On the other hand, if she spends all of her time weaving blankets, she would get 12 times 1.25, which is 15 again, and she'd have no fish. If we draw a line between those 2 points, we have her productive possibility frontier. Now, remember what we called it when somebody was better at producing something than the other person. They were more efficient at producing. We said that that person had an absolute advantage. And originally, Alice had an absolute advantage in catching fish, while Bob had an absolute advantage in weaving blankets. But now notice that Bob has no absolute advantages. Both of the absolute advantages go to Alice. She is better at both of these two things than Bob is. Now you could look at this graph, and if you were asking yourself, well, should Alice specialize and trade with Bob anymore? Does she have anything to gain by that? You might very well, your intuition might very well tell you, well, no. She can produce more fish. She can produce more blankets. Now, there's no way that she's going to be able to push her consumption beyond her production possibility frontier if she trades with Bob, because he's just not that good relative to her at producing these things. Okay? But it turns out that looking at absolute advantages is not the best way of looking at this. It's going to lead your intuitions astray. Okay? Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to think about the opportunity costs of these two potential trading partners and think about whether one of them has a lower opportunity cost in producing one thing and the other has a lower opportunity cost in producing the other. All right, so let's go to an opportunity cost table. I've already filled in Bob's row because nothing has changed for him. His opportunity cost of 1 fish is 3 blankets, and of 1 blanket is 1/3 of a fish. What about Alice? Well, remember that she is equally good at producing a fish or a blanket. She gets 1.25 fish for every hour that she spends fishing, 1.25 blankets for every hour that she spends weaving. That means that her opportunity cost of catching 1 fish is the 1 blanket that she could have weaved in the same amount of time. And taking the reciprocal of 1, we still have 1. In the amount of time that it takes her to weave 1 fish, to weave 1 blanket, she could have caught 1 fish. Okay, so now let's take a look at these two And notice that when you're looking at what your trade-offs are producing one good versus the other, it's going to be the case that one of these two people has a lower opportunity cost of catching fish, while the other is going to have a lower opportunity cost of weaving a blanket. Okay, and that turns out to be fish for Alice. For every fish that she catches, she's giving up one blanket, whereas Bob would be giving up 3 blankets. So she has the lower opportunity cost for catching fish. If we look at blankets, it's the opposite. Bob is only giving up 1/3 of a fish for every blanket that he weaves, whereas Alice would be giving up an entire fish. So Bob has the lower opportunity cost. Okay? So even though Alice is better at both of these things than Bob is, when we think about their cost of production, Bob can actually produce blankets cheaper than Alice can, because she's giving up an entire fish to produce a blanket. He's only giving up 1/3 of a fish. And this having of a lower opportunity cost, that is an advantage in producing a good. The type of advantage we call it is a comparative advantage. Absolute advantage refers to just who is better at producing something. Comparative advantage asks who can produce it cheaper. Okay? And it's going to turn out that if these two people specialize where they have a comparative advantage, then they trade with each other, they will still be able to make one another better off than they would if they just produced for their own consumption. Okay? And by the way, whereas it's possible for somebody to have an absolute advantage in both productive possibilities, it's impossible for them to have a comparative advantage. For them to have a comparative advantage in both of the two productive possibilities. If you have a comparative advantage in one productive possibility, then you will not have a comparative advantage in the other. Okay, and this is true no matter how good or bad. Well, I suppose if Bob couldn't produce anything, then he doesn't have a comparative advantage. But assuming that he can produce at least a little bit of both of these two things, he's going to have a comparative advantage in one of them. Okay, so let's go back to our graph and let's talk about what would happen if they specialized and they traded. They're going to specialize where they have the comparative advantage. The comparative advantage of Alice was in fish still, and the comparative advantage for Bob was in blankets. So she's going to spend her 12 hours fishing, and she gets 15 fish. Doesn't weave any blankets. He spends his 12 hours weaving blankets, so he catches no fish, and he weaves 12 blankets. And now they're going to sit down and trade with each other. I'm going to choose a trade ratio of 1 fish for 2 blankets. And like before, we're going to say that they make 4 trades with each other. Okay, so she trades off 4 fish to Bob. That leaves her with 11 fish. They're trading 2 blankets for each fish, so he has to trade back to her 8 blankets in exchange for those 4 fish. Taking those 8 blankets away from the 12 that he had weaved, he gets 4 blankets. And now, if we look at their consumption bundles, Bob is going to be here at 4 and 4. Okay, that makes him better off than he would have been if he was producing just for his own consumption. What about Alice? She gets 11 fish, which is going to be right about there. And she gets 8 blankets, which is roughly here. And you'll notice that puts her out here. So even though she is better at producing either of those goods than Bob is, she can still make herself better off by specializing in one of those tasks, allowing Bob to specialize in the other, and then trading their surplus with each other. Okay, this is the law of comparative advantage, that even a dominant trading partner can still make themselves better off by specializing and trading. And this, it turns out, is, at least in my opinion, the most feel-good result in all of economics. This tells you that, you don't have to be the best at producing something. Okay, you don't have to be. We all remember those people in high school who were like, the most attractive, and they were smart, and they were popular, and they were, great athletes and whatever. Okay, they had everything going for them, just like Alice does in this example right here. And most of us, we're not that person. Okay, we have our weaknesses. We're not the top of the class in any particular thing. There are other people who are more attractive than us, whatever. But what the law of comparative advantage tells us is that that doesn't matter. You don't have to be the best at producing something. In fact, you could even be the worst at producing something. You still matter when it comes to the economy, when it comes to production. Even if you're the worst at producing everything, you can still help other people get more than they would have by specializing and trading with them. Okay. By the same token, if you are an Alice, right? If you are somebody who is the best at everything, that should also give you some cause for humility to realize that while you're better possibly than somebody else at everything you can do, that doesn't put you beyond them. It doesn't mean that you don't need that person. That person can still enrich your life, can still make you better off if you're willing to specialize and trade with them, and therefore enable them to specialize and trade with you. This also, incidentally, means that there are cases where people who are very good at multiple things they're better off not doing some of those things, even if they could do them better than somebody else. So, for example, Martha Stewart. Okay, she's well known as kind of, I wouldn't say housekeeping, but she does a lot of design and style and has a lot of knowledge and tips about keeping a clean home and serving fine meals and the like, and cooking, all of that. But guess what? She probably does almost none of that stuff for herself. Okay, she probably does not cook very many of her own meals. She probably doesn't clean her house. She may not even do much of the interior decorating of her home, although maybe she does just for pleasure. Okay, why not? Because even though she's probably better at those things than you or I are, she's even better at that at being the CEO of a company. Okay, and specializing to be a CEO, she allows her to produce a lot more so that she can pay other people to cook her meals and to keep her house clean, even if she could do those things better than those other people can do them for her. Okay. By the same token, I don't know how good an economics professor LeBron James is. Probably he's not that great. Wouldn't be that great if you gave him that job. But let's just say that he was. Let's suppose that he was twice as good of an economics professor as I am. Okay. We would still want him to be playing basketball, because even though he might be 2 times as good at being a college professor as I am, he's at least 100 times better at being an NBA player. Okay. And by bringing him into the classroom and making him a professor, we would be giving up lots and lots of production of entertainment in athletics that just wouldn't be worth it. We would be better off with me in the classroom and LeBron James on the court, even if he was a better college professor than I am. All right. In the next and final video, we're going to talk a bit about some of the so what questions. What are some of the applications of comparative advantage to policy questions that we face?